Chapter 6, Value-Driven Classrooms, a school culture that develops character. If you don't work in education, you might not understand what a teacher's job really is. If you think our job is to teach students reading, writing, and math, you're wrong. Teachers teach students, not subjects. We are in the business of growing people by creating situations in which students collaborate, think critically, and solve problems. This requires that our schools and all teachers take an active role in developing our children in our classrooms, not only as scholars, but also as human beings with strength of character, developing a moral code. Psychologists understand morality not in terms of its inherent presence or absence, but rather as something that develops as a child learns and grows. The initial leader in the field of moral development was psychologist and researcher Lawrence Kolberg. His research, which built on the theories of fellow psychologist Jean Piaget, presented participants with a series of dilemmas and identified 3 different stages of moral development. While there has been criticism of Kolberg's work, especially given that it focused on the experiences of Western males, his 3 stages are a useful tool in understanding how children develop moral reasoning skills. In Kolberg's levels of moral development, children begin at a pre-conventional stage where their moral reasoning is focused on obedience and avoidance of punishment. Then they shift to look at moral decisions based on the rules of society and how they will be perceived by others. This stage, focused on being good, is called the conventional stage. We have all had students in our classroom who built their identity around being the good kid. I once had a girl in my class who was visibly nervous at the thought of getting in trouble. I talked with her and staged reprimanding her in front of the whole class just so she could see that making a mistake and being corrected was nothing to fear. Ultimately, some children will reach a post-conventional stage where they examine societal rules to determine what justice means to them and begin to follow self-chosen ethical principles. It is important to note ethicist and psychologist Carol Gilligan's theory, which adopts the same 3 levels, but contends morality is care-based and that people follow ethics based on their care of others. Theories of moral development help us teachers understand that morality exists on a continuum. But I also see another key takeaway from analyzing how moral development fits into our classrooms. If we want to develop highly moral students, our goal should not be to create compliant, rule-following, perfect students. Our ideal should not be schools with silent hallways where students never interrupt. These schools might have obedient students who avoid punishment, but they are not necessarily the most morally developed. According to this theory, a student with advanced moral development will create their own code of ethics. It might align with the values of the school, but it might also be different. A student with advanced moral development might be someone who questions the authority of a school, especially when the school or its policies are inequitable. And given the reality of the achievement gap in American schools, it would be hard to make the argument that our nation's schools are equitable. I am not saying that schools should do away with rules or expectations for behavior, but I do think a highly moral school culture might also value productive rebellion based on strong and solid principles. Impact of character education. The term character education can be a bit ambiguous since it is an umbrella term and because its meaning has changed over time. The U.S. Department of Education has defined it as an inclusive term encompassing all aspects of how schools, related social institutions, and parents can support the positive character development of children and adults. The definition continues. Character education teaches the habits of thought and deed that help people live and work together as families, friends, neighbors, communities, and nations. Character.org, a privately funded nonprofit organization that works with schools, districts, and other organizations to develop character in students, adds that it addresses many tough issues in education while developing a positive school climate. For me, character education means an effort by the whole school community to positively develop a strength of character that will help students live in our society both today and tomorrow. Currently, there is no clear consensus on the impact formal character education programs have on student academics or student behavior. Institute of Education Sciences, the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, and the Division of Violence Prevention in the National Center for Injury Prevention collaborated to write a 656-page report evaluating the impact of 7 social and character development programs over the course of 3 years. The report did not yield evidence that the 7 programs improved student outcomes. Another publication from Fresno State University reports, our research suggests that school goals and activities that are associated with good character education programs are also associated with academic achievement. Thus, our results argue for maintaining a rich curriculum with support for all aspects of student development and growth. And a 2013 article in The Atlantic stated, schools that teach character education report higher academic performance, improved attendance, reduced violence, and fewer disciplinary issues, reduction in substance abuse, and less vandalism. Character education should not be seen as a magical intervention that solves learning and behavior problems, nor should we justify teaching our students to be positive members of society based on the ability to improve test scores. As a teacher, I strive to model positive character traits and cultivate a supportive culture because it is the right thing to do. My students will grow up to become members of my community, and I want to live in a society with people who are caring, hardworking, and resilient. As a state and federal character education advocate, Linda McKay says, I think it's absolutely one of the most critical pieces for education, particularly in high-risk schools. If we don't focus on creating a climate for learning and a classroom culture where students and faculty feel cared for and respected, we won't get to the academics. Character, an academic priority. There is much discussion on how teaching character can predict future success in a student or lead to a student meeting a long-term goal like graduation from high school. This is all true, but we must also look at a more immediate benefit of teaching character education. As a 3rd grade teacher, it is not possible to teach my students academic content standards if I do not also develop an understanding of character strengths, ethics, and values. Pure and simple, in order to read my students, I need to understand the strengths and weaknesses of personal character. After all, the purpose of literature is to reflect humanity back on ourselves, to teach us lessons about society and ourselves. In Colorado, our schools have adopted the Common Core state standards and a move toward more rigorous instruction, which I wholeheartedly champion. We may think these standards are purely academic, but on a closer look, we see that knowledge that comes from character development runs throughout. Of the 9 English language arts standards for reading literature in 3rd grade, I see direct connections to character education in 5. For example, my 3rd grade students need to describe the traits, motivations, or feelings of characters in order to achieve that goal. My students first need to have a knowledge of and a vocabulary surrounding character traits. When I cultivate a shared understanding of courage, determination, and honesty in my classroom, I teach not just the dictionary definition of those particular words. I also help develop the conceptual knowledge and an ability to describe a character in a story or a person in their lives. Another key standard for my 3rd grade students is to determine the central message, lesson, or moral of a text. I help my students build that skill by intentionally discussing how people, both in real life and in books, overcome hardships and use strategies to solve problems. More rigorous standards have made developing empathy an academic requirement. My students need to understand that authors, like all people, have beliefs and attitudes. They need to recognize textual evidence that denotes an author's feelings and opinions. When students are able to empathize, that meets another standard, to distinguish their own point of view from that of the narrator or those of the characters. I think of a guided reading lesson I recently taught. In order to understand the book, my students needed to read and decode the text, but they also needed to decipher that the main character's actions were driven by jealousy and her motivation was to be accepted by her peers. Students discussed this and wrote an essay explaining how the author explored the themes of jealousy and friendship. They could not have done this if they were not able to empathize and analyze the integrity of the characters in the story. Character education and reading comprehension go hand in hand. The complex act of reading requires students to engage with characters in a book in the same way they interact with people in real life. At every level, students must be able to notice the character traits present or absent in a text. They must take note of thoughts and actions that imply a character's emotions in order to make inferences about the character's underlying motivations. These skills are developed when we intentionally develop a child's emotional intelligence alongside their academic abilities. Quite frankly, character education is an academic priority not just for the success in the future, but for success every day in the classroom. Integrated character. We teachers cannot spend a few minutes a day talking to our students about respect or integrity and think it's going to make a meaningful impact on them. Character education should not be merely a scheduled event. Rather, character needs to be woven into every part of our school day. Good character needs to be part of our school culture and modeled in the way we treat our students and colleagues. This was a lesson learned from the Partnerships in Character Education state pilot projects. It was found that collectively, the states reported that implementation must include the entire school community and be integrated throughout the entire school curriculum and culture. Possibly, the most vocal leader in integrating character education into public schools is David Levin, co-founder of KIPP Charter Schools. David's unlikely collaboration with psychology professor Martin Seligman, Professor Angela Duckworth, known for her work studying grit, and private school headmaster Dominic Randolph, was profiled in a 2011 New York Times Magazine article. It described how the team worked to develop a comprehensive character education program that focused on a set of strengths that were, according to the research, especially likely to predict life satisfaction and high achievement. Levin emphasizes a strategy in his schools where teachers explicitly discuss character during lessons. For example, English classes discuss the character strengths and weaknesses of the protagonists in the novels that the class is reading. This helps students recognize their own strengths and weaknesses. This is a great example of how character education is not just another thing that teachers need to find a way to fit into our already busy day. It is something that should be woven purposefully throughout the day, a sentiment echoed by many. Timothy Rusnick, a former professor and principal of Ben Franklin High, one of the highest ranked schools in Louisiana, has stated that students' attention should be focused on the ethical dimensions of stories, the moral aspects of history, and applying the moral of a story to the student's own life. Bob Chase, the former president of the National Education Association, said, "We must make an explicit commitment to formal character education. We must integrate character education into the fabric of the curriculum and into extracurricular activities. We must train teachers in character education, both pre-service and in-service, and we must consciously set about creating a moral climate within our schools." Making the decision to integrate character education consciously is important. The act of learning itself requires a strong character. Curiosity, perseverance, and resiliency are all requirements to acquiring knowledge. Take the time to be deliberate about character in each lesson, whether it is calling out specific character traits from a story or simply closing a lesson with a reflection on how well the school community's values were demonstrated. Teacher tools. Number 1, creating common values. In order to teach our students character, each school community will have to define what character means and what qualities the students in their school should strive to embody. This is the first step. Determining the values you want your students to embody might be more difficult than it seems. There are many dimensions to character. It all depends on which lens you want to look through. You could see character in terms of moral character versus performance character. Character.org has broken down aspects of character in this way. Fairness and generosity are both examples of the ethical values that make up moral character, while performance character focuses more on the individual and encompasses traits like effort and diligence. Another way to look at character is through relationships. The Institute of Education Sciences categorizes 3 types of values according to which form of relationship they fit into. First are interpersonal values, those characterizing the individual's behavior and attitudes in a wide range of situations and activities, such as honesty, perseverance, and integrity. There are also interpersonal values, which are characterizing the individual's behavior and attitudes toward others, like caring, respect, and empathy. Finally, there are civic virtues, which are characterizing the individual's behavior and attitudes toward the community and society. and include patriotism and justice. Even more important than selecting character traits to emphasize in a school community is the selection process itself. An analysis of the efficacy of the character education state pilot projects found that perhaps the most important lesson to emerge from the character education pilot project reports was that successful character education requires the participation of the entire community. This sentiment was echoed by education advocate Linda McKay. What I saw emerging in research grants was that in order for character education to be effective, it really has to be a school-wide process based on faculty, students, and parents. I have realized that any character program that mandates a pre-selected list of values is missing a vital component. The values of a community reflect the entire community and should be determined by all stakeholders. Yes, this includes teachers and school leaders, but also students and families. When beginning or expanding a character education program in your classroom, it is wise to ask for input from the students and the broader community, something I'm working toward at my school. Find out what their ideal classroom community would look like, how your community wants to be treated when they are in school, what character traits students want to see in their classmates, and what vision everyone has for their future. Allowing the entire community to play an active role in determining the values of their school serves two purposes. First, it will create more buy-in from students because everyone is more eager to participate in something they've had hand in creating. Second, and even more importantly, our students know more about what it is like to be a kid or adolescent in today's world than we teachers do. Our students are experts in the challenges they face, and they can be great sources in pinpointing exactly what character traits are needed to overcome those obstacles. Students and families have contributions and insights that should be valued when determining the core values of a school community. Schools should keep in mind that these values belong to everyone. As the school community grows and changes, the values of a school might need to evolve along with it. I don't mean that a school will all of a sudden stop valuing respect, but perhaps there might be a renewed need to emphasize innovation or creativity. I can also see school culture shifting focus between values that pertain to individuals, such as a personal effort, to values with a focus on the community, like collaboration. In this way, a school's values might be thought of like a mural, which can be carefully added to or amended over time, instead of as words etched into stone. Number 2, common language. Once the values of a school community have been clarified, a common language can be formed. Building this common language among teachers, students, and community members is the foundation of developing character, but it is often a neglected step. Most research on shared language comes from the business world and the healthcare industry, where ineffective communication can cost profits or even lives. Interestingly, this research suggests the efficacy of shared language depends entirely on empathy. As stated in the Australasian Medical Journal, looking at communication from the endpoint of the user helps us to develop empathy, which is a critical factor in building relationships and being able to communicate effectively with others. Yet another reason to incorporate character education in our schools. Our schools can learn important lessons by examining the way we talk about our values. As teachers, we help our students understand the concepts behind our values, like what it means to be responsible. But this clarifying work is also necessary for the adults too. We all come with our own perceptions of values, which are heavily influenced by our backgrounds and the realities of our lives. The specific words a school uses matter. Think of the nuanced differences between honesty and truth. At my school, our community places a high value on kindness. You will hear that word repeated all over our school. I say, "Can you show kindness and help us clean up?" And during the morning announcements, our principal praises students who have been kind to others at recess. I frequently hear our students compliment each other for being a kind friend. When our students hear the word kind from so many sources and for so many occasions, it is powerful. In our school, a shared language around the value of kindness helps us celebrate exceptional character in our students. Students are able to see kindness in themselves and their peers, but they can also recognize its absence. When students make bad decisions, this shared language helps us have discussions with students that go far beyond getting in trouble. We can help students understand that a hurtful action is wrong, not just because it breaks a rule, but also because being unkind goes against their personal character. It is also helpful to discuss what your school values would look like in a different setting. Our school does just that. We explicitly teach our students what our values look like in the hallway, on the playground, even in the bathroom. We hang posters that make it clear what our expectations are for their behavior. You can recruit your students to help make these. It's as simple as passing out a few pieces of paper and having groups of students write 3 ways to show gratitude in the lunch line, or how students can be responsible during study hall. Schools are made up of so many individuals, but a shared language helps build community. It acts as a bridge that ties the community together and gives us a common identity. Number 3, character rubrics. Teachers are familiar with rubrics to help students evaluate their academic content, but rubrics can also be powerful tools to help them develop strong character. In academia, rubrics have typically been used for the purpose of scoring. The creator of the rubric, usually the teacher, determines the criteria and the dimensions of the product to be assessed. Then each criterion is described for different levels of performance. Usually there are points connected to each level of performance, but there are some important distinctions between a scoring rubric and a supportive character rubric. There are several character rubrics being used in schools that are great resources. Many of these rubrics evaluate character for students based on the frequency a specific trait is demonstrated, like one from the Character Count 6-pillar program that evaluates if a student respects authority always, almost always, usually, sometimes, or seldom. There is an implication that the difference between someone with a strong character and someone with a weak character is how often that individual exhibits a particular trait or behavior. This is a dangerous fallacy, as even a bank robber could almost always, for example, honor people's property. In addition, this form of rubric is not descriptive enough for students. It provides no information on what respects authority looks like. For me, the purpose of a character rubric is to give students a clear picture of what a value looks like in real life. It should give students a judgment-free continuum for a particular character trait or value. This allows them to see that traits like honesty and responsibility can grow with effort over time, and that character can change and grow too. It counteracts the detrimental idea that character traits are fixed. Another key distinction is that these rubrics are for our students, which means that these measures should use language students understand and that is meaningful to them. These rubrics could even be created by students. As teachers, we can certainly facilitate the creation of these rubrics to ensure they are accurate and supportive. But the most powerful rubrics will be student-directed. One last note. It is the purpose of a character rubric for students to be able to reflect on their own character and set goals. Then quantifying or rewarding points to a value might be counterproductive. There is a strong urge in education to make everything data-driven, but we need to ask ourselves if scoring a student's character strength is yielding the results we want. Personally, I want my students to self-reflect and think, I need to work on listening to others so I can understand their point of view, not, I need more points on empathy. The difference between these two thoughts is certainly a result of the way a teacher frames the conversation. But the second we attach numbers to character traits, we are creating a system driven by sums and averages, and that does not always meet our goal of developing strong character. Teaching our students good character means teaching them the skills they need right now as students, and also to be strong members of the society we will release them into. As adults, our students will need both academic skills and strong character to succeed. But what good is an education that produces students with perfect grades but little integrity? What impact can our students make on the world if they analyze data and state facts, but do not possess the curiosity and perseverance to ask difficult questions and struggle to seek answers? What type of change would be made on a global scale if our schools gave equal focus to developing critical thinking skills and developing a deep sense of empathy? Educators need to remember this basic truth. Our students will grow to become our neighbors, our peers, and hopefully even my superiors. The impact our students have on us might and should be greater than the impact we have on our students. It is also true that our students, once independent in the world, will carry with them the values they learned both in their homes and in their schools. With this in mind, I choose to intentionally teach character in my classroom. I can't afford not to. I truly believe I am educating the children who will become my bosses, my leaders, and my inspiration one day. That belief impacts the priorities of my teaching. I am not only preparing my students to take tests, but I am preparing my students to lead myself and my city. The goal of my teaching is both to develop problem-solving skills and the will to solve problems. I expect greatness from my students, and therefore also I expect pride, tolerance, and resiliency. Many of my students have already learned aspects of a strong character from their families and communities. It is my goal to build upon what my students have already learned. My classroom acts as an incubator that grows and develops even further values each student begins the school year with. Over the course of the year, I see my students become even more compassionate and more dedicated than when we first met. It's a beautiful thing. Yes, I need to teach my students academic skills, and I take that responsibility very seriously. But an equal priority for me is to teach them the values that will help them form into the people my community needs and deserves. To me, this is the purpose of schooling.